Hi, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connection. Each of us have stories that help us understand each other and help to bring our community closer together. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who've had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who've had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories. Community Connections is about these people and about their stories. I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting these amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Please enjoy. Welcome to Community Connections. My name is Gordy Hogue, and today's guest is a remarkable woman. She grew up in the Gatineau Hills of Quebec, where she loved to swim and skate and go hiking and canoeing. And she just loved the outdoors, and that passion led her to become an environmental and a social activist, and eventually led her to law school, where she studied environmental law. So I'm delighted to welcome Pixie Hobby to Community Connections. Welcome, Pixie.
Oh, thank you, Gordy. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
So can you tell us a little bit about growing up and the things that got you passionate about our environment and the work around that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was actually born in the city of Ottawa. And when I was about maybe 2.5, my parents moved from the city and got a house in the country up in the Gatineau Hills. And I grew up there, and it was just beautiful. We were surrounded by forests, so I spent all day long, as soon as I'd eat, I'd run outside and play in the forest and come in for lunch sometimes and go back out again. And I developed such a close relationship with the natural environment. I would go catching frogs. I remember once taking my mom's plastic juicer, you know, those things that they mix juice in. I took one of those and I came home proudly. I had stuffed something close to 15 or 20 frogs, like ripped the lid off, and they went hopping all over the kitchen. And my mother was like laughing her head off. And another time I brought in a shoebox full of snakes and put it under my mother said, we can't have that in the house. And so I snuck some lettuce from the fridge. I didn't know what snakes ate, but I put some snakes under the bed, and my mom came to kiss me goodnight, and she accidentally kicked the box over and snakes came out, and my mother was snakes. I had a few exciting episodes like that, but as I got older, I still spent time. Our family moved. That house that my parents moved to initially burned to the ground, sadly, and we're not quite sure what caused the fire, but we moved further north, and I again in a completely rural area, and I grew up like skating and skiing and not kayaking, but canoeing, and spending all my time outdoors. And I had an absolute passion for all living things. I wanted to be a veterinarian at one point, and then a wildlife biologist. And so when I got to high school, my mom sent me to a convent so I wouldn't be distracted by boys. And I got taught by nuns, and I loved biology and chemistry most of all, and just wanted to pursue a career in the environmental sciences. And I actually did that when I went on to university. I didn't want to develop too much in the inductive reasoning and too much in the deductive reasoning. So I did a combined major of philosophy and biology. That's how I started, and got into, in my advanced years, working with electron microscopy and ecology, and eventually really focused on ecology, and then added engineering courses because I became acutely aware of the pollution problem. And then, as you probably remember, in the 70s, it was like the golden age, in a way, of environmental protection legislation, like all these bits of legislation, provincial and federal, that were geared towards protecting the environment from pollutants. And so I ended up taking engineering as well as the biology and the philosophy, so that I had I felt well-rounded education. And then started working on a master's degree. I got fascinated with gardening in that time, and growing organic gardens. And while I was in I think it was my third or fourth year at university, I bought some land and designed and built with my boyfriend at the time a house, like an A-frame in the forest at the top of a mountain, and you could not access it by car in the winter. And I had a maple sugar bush there and a garden, and I got fascinated with gardening, organic gardening, bioorganic, French intensive type gardening that I'd learned about. And I wanted to learn more about soils. And I took some courses in that, and then got all excited and wanted to do my master's on biogeochemical recycling and forest ecosystems, and started down that path. And then got a job at Ottawa University working on some water pollution projects. One of them was water pollution in the Ottawa River caused by discharges from a local pulp and paper plant. And then another one related to nutrient loading in a beautiful lake in the Gatineau Park. So I did that kind of work, and that took me right into the thick of the discussion, the political discussion at the time about environmental protection. And I had a really transformational experience when both the projects that I worked on to come up with a solution to the environmental problems in the lake and in the river. I worked on a report. I had other colleagues working on it as well, and we submitted reports, and they were just shelved, like nothing was done. And then I thought, oh my goodness, this looks really bad for the environmental movement, because I felt that I had been co-opted by the political powers that be, because they had pacified the public by saying, oh, we're studying this, we're going to get the work done, whether these studies are underway, and when we get the studies, we'll implement the changes. Well, that never happened. And I felt it was maybe it could be perceived as a betrayal to all the other environmental activists who were looking to the work we were doing as going to be successful. And it didn't turn out that way. And I got really concerned. I wouldn't say depressed, but I felt like, what am I doing? Like, now, where is this going? We've been kind of co-opted or bought out. Everybody thinks something's going to happen and nothing is happening. And that's when my boyfriend suggested at the time, he said, you should go to law school, and you can, this is a situation that needs to have a legal solution. And I really didn't want to go. I said, no, I don't want to do Dad, I want to do municipal planning. I want to do planning. That's what I really, and environmental work together. He said, no, you have to understand that you won't accomplish what you want. You know, you've just seen what happens. You write reports and they just doesn't produce any real results. So he talked me into going to law school. And I did, and I had the best time ever. I loved everything about it. It wasn't like work. It was like being in a wonderland of learning. Of course, I like learning, but I learned so many valuable things in law school, not just the law. But I loved constitutional law and administrative law, which is the law that governs the relationship between an individual and the state. Environmental law was not taught at that time.
Oh.
So I never took it, but I actually ended up in that area. And although I didn't start there, I started after completing my studies at law school. I articled for a law firm in Ottawa called Hewitt Nesbitt Reed, and they specialized in, amongst other things, municipal law. And I got a lot of experience doing that. And then when I came out, I put out 106 applications for work. And I ended up, of all places, at the Department of Justice in the tax litigation section doing income tax work. That gave me a chance to be in court a lot. I was in court. If I wanted to, I could be there every day. So I had the great pleasure of learning litigation skills early in my career, when judges still take the attitude that you're a young Padawan learner, if I can borrow an expression from Star Wars. And so they're more patient with your gaffes and your mistakes. You don't want to go in there at say, age 42, making mistakes in a courtroom. But as a young person, I had to learn to speak loud and clearly instead of being so quiet like a little mouse. And I thoroughly enjoyed that work. And everything was going well until 1987, I guess, or 88. I accidentally broke my left ankle in several places while coaching a women's softball group on the lawn of the Supreme Court of Canada, and my leg went down a gopher hole, and I broke my leg, and it kind of laid me up for a while, and I learned a lot from that experience. At the time, I was taking a special course offered by the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants on estate planning. And after I had broken my leg, I went to the final section of that course, and it was held in Vancouver. And during that time, at the graduation ceremony, a very inspiring speaker from the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants spoke to us. His name was Mr. Jones. I remember that. And in a room, I was sitting near the back with my cast on my leg, and he was talking about the fact that we've learned something very special, but there are some people in this room who shouldn't be doing this kind of work, and there's something else that you should be doing, and you should be listening. And he told us of the story of his recent recovery from cancer, when he was diagnosed as having terminal cancer, and he survived, and he went through some major life-changing experience. And he said that some of you are going to have to listen to your heart and maybe not follow this line of work any longer, and I felt he was talking directly to me. And so I came home and I told my husband, who sadly has passed away since that time, I told him about this, and he encouraged me. He said, "Mr. Jones is right. You really don't belong in that place. Yes, I know you love going to court, but there's something more important you should be doing." And he's fully supported me. And I made some inquiries at work about possibly going over and working for Environment Canada. And they were actually looking for somebody at the time. And I started there in the December of 1988. And I was working on the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the CEPA, working on federal-provincial relations, because that act caused a huge amount of friction between the federal government and the provinces at the time, and it was like a jurisdictional battle. And I loved playing what I thought was a healing role, the lawyer as the healer, that brings two parties together that are at odds and works on a solution where everybody gets their needs met. Nobody comes out the winner and then we have a loser, but everybody gets their needs met. I love doing that work. And at the same time, I was asked to work on the climate change file. I worked on that one at the same time. And that led me into doing a lot of international environmental law. I attended in January of 1989. It was perhaps the first international meeting of experts to discuss the need for an international treaty or convention on climate change. And it was a real eye-opener. They were mostly technical people there, meteorologists and scientists and technicians. There were a couple of lawyers, but we were definitely in the minority, and we knew how to behave and keep our mouths shut and just listen. And but I left that meeting convinced that we had to do something. And together with my client at the time in Environment Canada, which was the Atmospheric Environment Services, and specifically Dr. Ferguson, and we arranged to hold in late May and June of that year the first international meeting of lawyers to discuss the development of an international convention on climate change. And the rest is history. We got it in place, and there were protocols like the Montreal Protocol and the Kyoto Protocol that attached to that convention. And it wasn't long after that my boss's boss came knocking on my door and asked me whether I would please join the team to work on the development of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, because there was a need for work, and the lawyer who was working on that file had some very serious health challenges and was not being able to devote as much energy and time to the file as he would have liked to. And I looked at the draft of the law, and I looked at it and I said to my boss, I don't want to do that. I want to keep doing what I'm doing. And then my boss's boss called me up and said, we really need you on this file. And I said, well, I don't want to do it. And then he just said, you're doing it. So I did. I kind of at the beginning, a bit reluctantly took it on. And then when I went over to the Federal Environmental Review Office and met the incredible staff over there, the technologists, the engineers, the biologists, these were outstanding individuals, a very unique federal body of brilliant people and committed, dedicated, and highly creative. And I was so grateful that I was asked to do that work. I had the time of my life. Was it easy? No, it was difficult. And difficult in the sense that we were trying to craft a law a federal law that applied to all federal departments and agencies, some of whose mandates were actually conflicting. And so trying to get everybody on the same page, it was worse than herding kittens. But again, I resorted to that concept of a lawyer as a healer, a person that brings people together. And we successfully got the law in place. We went through the House of Commons committee process twice. And we even were able to bring in, as part of my drafting team, members of the Canadian Environmental Network at the time, which was unheard of. Usually all federal law is drafted by the Department of Justice with instructions from a client department. And these are confidences of the Queen's Privy Council while the law is being developed, and it's all hush hush. Nobody talks about it or shares it. But we were given an exemption in this case by I guess it was the Privy Council office must have okayed it. Machinery of government was involved in that decision, and we had an outstanding experience putting that together, collaborating, working with First Nations, working with environmental groups, working with federal departments and agencies. And we were able to produce a functioning law that really worked. I often said at the end of it, I went in with a silk scarf and came out with a wool sock, but it still fit and it worked. And it worked well until 2013, when sadly the Harper government made some amendments to that legislation, which basically took the teeth and the stuffing out of it. So you
were involved from the very beginning and the foundation and leading our country, and in many ways leading the world in that. How did you end up coming out to the West Coast and getting involved in that as you moved forward?
Oh yeah, well, that came about after I finished working on the Environmental Assessment Act. I was asked by some departments, including, well, I was asked by a number of departments to help them work on specific regulations that those departments that would apply to these departments to implement the Environmental Assessment Act. For example, the Canadian International Development Agency, they were looking to develop regulations that would apply to projects overseas that were receiving funding from the Canadian government. And we wanted to make sure that the projects were environmentally sound and wouldn't result in a disaster. And what was on our minds at the time, if you might remember, Gordy, the whole Bhopal episode where a plant had blown up and killed lots of people and made a lot of people very seriously ill. And we kept thinking, we don't want that to happen with a project that was receiving funding from Canada. So I went there to work for a while. And when that work was finished, Indian Affairs Department, at least it used to be called Indian Affairs, asked me whether I would come and work with them to develop regulations that would apply on Indian reserves, on treaty settlement lands, and so I said yes, I would do that, and we started working on that. And then there were some problems with the communities we were working with not being able to, I guess, collaborate in a way that they could put forward something that came from them that wasn't sort of pushed by government. And we were waiting for them to come forward with some ideas and plans. And in the meantime, while we were waiting, I was asked to work on some self-government initiatives. One of them was called the First Nations Forest Management Act. And the idea there was that this would be a piece of legislation that would allow First Nations to opt out of the Indian Act and run their own show, make their own laws and their own regime for managing forests on their lands, and that started in a fabulous way with a great team, and we were very close to finalizing everything. And in fact, I learned so much from the 14 chiefs that I was working with, and I learned during that process how First Nations concept of forestry and forest management is light years beyond anything that settler colonists have in their minds about forest. And
I want to get people from our community get a sense of who you are and the things that you've done. And certainly one of the things you did recently was you were looking at the issue of thermal coal going through the South Surrey White Rock area with the BNSF. And
yes,
we'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm sure our listeners and watchers will be interested in the work you did there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Gord, for moving me on. Yes, in 2014, I was contacted by some residents of White Rock that were very worried about this train and asked what could be done. And I did some research, and I found out that we could start a mediation process under a process that was set up by the Canadian Transportation Agency. And so we wanted the agency to take a look at the issue with the train, because here we had a situation, I guess everybody knows that this very dirty thermal coal was being shipped up to Canada by train to be exported to Asia out of our ports here, because none of the ports in the US wanted to have that coal going through their facilities. And first of all, it's a problem when it blows out of the train and alights in our environment. Secondly, it makes Canada look like a real bad actor on the world stage, shipping thermal coal at a time when we should be getting off fossil fuels, and Canada has been outspoken against the use of coal, and because of the problems that it causes with greenhouse gas emissions. And yet here we are aiding and abetting what could be described as an environmental crime to the whole world, because of course greenhouse gases don't respect political boundaries. They're up in the atmosphere. It doesn't matter whether they come from China or they come from South America or whether they come from Northern Europe. They're going up into our atmosphere, being carried on wind currents, and causing havoc all across the planet. And so I was working with an incredible group of people on that, particularly a lady by the name of Patsy, and
Was Eric Seitz part of that as well?
I believe he was there, but the person that I worked most closely with was Patsy. She was the ringleader, but there were other people that I worked with, and we really, there were a number of lawyers on the other side, and we kept them on their toes. But in the end, the Canadian Transportation Agency process didn't give us what we wanted, which was to shut down the whole export of the coal up here. And but it's something I think still needs to be addressed. I am so dismayed that this is continuing.
I've got some things I'd like to talk to you about how we might follow through on that one a little bit.
Absolutely.
I want people to get another sense of you, because you study yoga, you play the violin, you're an organic veggie farmer, you've done all of these things, and maybe you could tell quickly the little story about when you were going to university and you couldn't afford it, so you became a poker player.
Yes, I was in, I don't know, I was in my second or third year. And after my dad died when I was 14, my mom really struggled with 3 jobs at a time, trying to support 3 kids. And there was no way she could afford to pay for a school. And I was taking summer jobs, but at those times working for a dollar a quarter an hour, it's just so hard to make money. And I had very good marks in school, so I was able to get a scholarship to pay for my tuition, but I had no money to pay for books or anything else. So I went one time after school, some friends invited me over, and they were having a poker game, and I didn't know how to play. I hadn't got a clue. It was just not something that the nuns taught us in. My parents were bridge players, not poker players. And I had no clue how to play, but I watched with great interest several hands. And I figured out, oh gosh, that's how you play this game. So finally, I took a seat at the table, and I guess it's beginner's luck, but I walked away with about $650. And that was, it was enough money for me to be able to rent a room in town, so I could attend my labs that were at night from 7 till 10, and I didn't want to ask my mom to come and pick me up. It would have meant an hour drive for her to come and pick me up from my lab at 10 o'clock at night. So that's how I managed to do that. But that was my career. It ended right there. I haven't played since.
That's a wonderful story. And I one of my favorite books recently is a book called Range by David Epstein. And David argues that our future belongs to the generalist, not to the specialist. And as you tell your story, you're a generalist. You've been in so many areas with so many things that you feel passionate about that are still grounded in those environmental values. I think that's such a great credit to you, to our country, and now especially to our community as we go forward, and certainly talking about the things that in terms of the railway and things. I hope to talk to you more about that. I know Craig Harold I've talked to a number of times, as well as Eric, and we're hoping to do some more things in that. So on behalf of myself and all of our watchers and listeners, I want to say thank you so very much, Pixie, for sharing your wonderful stories with us and giving us a great sense of who you are and the great contributions you've made to the environment in our country and indeed around the world. So thank you very much for being a guest on Community Connections. Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.